I'm sure you have lots of questions, but I've got a couple myself, so I'm going to put them first to Lord Patten and Mr. Khurshid. Lord Patten, are we certain of continued economic growth? Because as late as in March 2010, when you wrote that a column entitled India Shines On, it looked like India was ready to take its place at the world high table. Today, things look difficult. The rupee gives you some indication. And of course, let me say that sentiment in India always vacillates between despair and absolute gloom. So we are at the stage of absolute gloom at the moment. Are you concerned?
No, I don't ever see the point in being a pessimist. And I certainly don't think there's very much to be said for being pessimistic about the future of 1.25 billion people, which is rather a large slice of humanity. I don't think that economic prediction is a science as exact as, say, weather forecasting. And we know how exact that is. And to some extent, whether India resumes growing at a rate which will deal with demographic pressures and will be good not only for India, but for India's trade partners and the countries in which India invests. That is partly going to be achieved by the policy decisions that Indian ministers make. It's partly going to be achieved by what Indian business does, but it will also be dependent on what happens in the global economy. It is true that with Europe flat on its back over the last few years, exports to Europe from India and from China have fallen. No country can have a sustainable economic model which depends entirely on exports. So you have to develop sensible internal consumption. You have to develop service industries, which India has done extremely well. And I think India, everybody knows, will grow more rapidly as it deals with some of its infrastructure problems, whether roads or ports or airports or power. So I don't think that growth is inevitable, but I certainly wouldn't be gloomy about India's prospects. And the fact that India is going to be the largest country in terms of population in the world with a smart, young, active workforce is the biggest boon of all for India and for the rest of us.
Mr. Khurshid, since you spoke about economics, and so before I get to geopolitics, and Lord Patten's spoken about the need for infrastructure, you touched upon that in your speech. You touched upon the fact that we are asking and we are inviting foreign investment into infrastructure. Is money really the issue? Because now you may argue with the numbers, but one number says that there are 7,000 billion rupees worth of projects that are stuck. So is money the issue, or does the government need to go down there and move real reform to get even the projects that are stuck back on the road?
Well, I think there are two aspects to this. One is big money investment that's required. I know that we are short on funds right now, but that we were flush with funds. Our states were in a good state 3 years ago. There wasn't a fear that any state would go bankrupt. Enormous amount of money is being spent in the social sector, but we need a lot more funding than we have available. But having said that, yes, it's true. It's true that there have been hiccups. There have been impediments. There have been false starts. There have been barriers that needed to be addressed. These are nothing to do with policy per se, but they are something to do with institutions moving in the same pace. We moved from one kind of economy to another kind of economy. There were some tough lessons to be learned as we moved from one economy one economic governance to another one. And we needed institutions to be on board. Some of our judges were not entirely on board. Some of our judges in the early part of independence were not on board about some of our important socialistic policies. Then we had a whole range of judges who pushed socialism very fast and very far. And then we've now come to a market-oriented way of life. To a large extent, the mix has changed, and there are some judges who've picked this up very quickly. There are other judges that will take a little bit longer. So there are institutional decisions on which we need to work harder. And I think that, if I might say this, I think we need to talk to each other better. Arun Jaitley and I need to talk a lot more to each other. And I think if you did a weekend in Oxford every month, we would achieve a lot more than we are able to achieve at home. But
we'll do that.
I think when you hear him speak, you will probably know that there are people on both sides of the political divide who are waiting for this conversation to move forward. And I think we need some storytellers and some conversationalists who will break the ice and move us forward.
Lord Patten, again, economics. There's a school of thought which says that what happened after the crisis was the bankers got in, and they bought time for governments and policymakers. By introducing a whole host of monetary changes and pumping more money into the global system. But unfortunately, the policymakers just kicked the can further down the road. So they haven't really got down and got into using the time that banks bought them, central bankers bought them, to making the real reforms. We blame Indian policymakers for that in India, but this is true of the rest of the world. Would you agree with that? And
I think it varies from country to country and region to region. I thought you were going to say something different about bankers.
I'm talking about central bankers. I'm talking about central bankers.
I would certainly draw a distinction between central bankers and bankers as a whole, because I think there is a lot of resentment in every country about the extent to which banking as an industry appeared to want to privatize gains and socialize losses, and I think that has caused tensions in most of our countries. I think what is called, terrible phrase, quantitative easing, putting more money into the system, did enable, certainly in Europe and America, did enable us to avoid disaster, and with even higher rates of unemployment and even greater contractions in net disposable income. I think in Europe, it is certainly the case that a focus on both austerity in public spending and monetary easing in order to keep some sort of level of economic activity has been sometimes at the expense of structural reform and reform in labor markets and product markets. So I don't think we've gone as far as we should in those areas. And I say that as a background to commenting that a lot of your friends, India's friends in Europe and America, take, for example, a newspaper like the Financial Times and Martin Wolf, who's a very, very positive friend of India. I think he would express surprise that there was a period for a couple of years when what was the most economically literate government in the world, that is India's, didn't seem to be pushing a reform agenda as much as India's friends thought it should have been. Now, you can raise that criticism, as I said, about European governments as well, but it would be dishonest not to note that it's something which has been said about a particular period of what seemed to be political stasis in India.
I'm going to go back now from economic progress to how we can get to be a better or play a more significant role in global affairs. One of the criticisms of India's foreign policy is that we don't really do enough to push the interests of Indian business abroad. When you had David Cameron come to India, he came in with a large delegation, went back with lots of orders from India, as did President Sarkozy, as did President Obama. But the feeling is that when Indian prime ministers visit friendly capitals, they really don't seem to have business on top of the agenda. Is that a valid criticism?
Well, I'll tell you why, because our businessmen are much faster than we are, and they get there long before we do. But I see the point. I think there's a cultural thing here. We are a lot more comfortable dealing with business today than we were, say, 15 years or 20 years ago. There are now some events in which we associate with top business houses or with certainly the business organizations and industry and so on. But perhaps not quite to the extent that you would see in the US, UK, and France and Germany. But then I think that there is both a cultural thing and also a moment in how you change your attitudes and governance and styles of governance. And I think over the years you will see that happening much more.
Okay, so will that become part of India's geopolitical goal, to use its economic power to further Indian business abroad?
Well, that's something on which I would be very careful. We've never treated that. For us, the most important part of our foreign policy has been what we call development partnerships, not business. Development partnerships come first, and I think it's important that we shouldn't forget that India is a developing country.
Doesn't business lead to development? Because it creates jobs, creates...
Well, absolutely. So, therefore, it's just a matter of what kind of mix that you're giving. Obviously, development partnership means that produce of India is manufactured product of India goes to where we are doing the project, whether it's in Afghanistan or it's in part of South Asia, Southeast Asia, or Africa. But that's Indian expertise and Indian products that are actually going even in partnership. But we believe that that's a different way of dealing with friends than, say, for instance, China does. China is much more business-like. China is much more like an ATM. Let's cash in and go. But India is there for the longer stay. India believes that we need to be rooted in the place where we go, and I believe that that's something that works better for us.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for being a very, very patient audience. We're going to take a small break at this point of time, maybe 5 minutes, cup of coffee, come back, and we'll continue this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.